Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks to Compressor Tech for hosting this. Again, Hans and I are going to discuss the results from our hydrogen fuel gas blending that we've completed over the last year, specifically on large bore 2-cycle legacy reciprocating compressor and engines. So a quick look at our agenda. We're going to quickly discuss hydrogen and combustion basics, some of the factors that need to be considered when completing fuel gas blending and running them in these particular engines. We'll review the lab and field testing units that we utilized both here in Houston and out in the field. And then I'll turn it over to Hans and he'll run through the test results that we saw both at our R&D test facility as well as what we saw in the field. Hopefully we leave some time for questions and potentially some discussions around the lessons learned. I think we should get us back on track with the schedule here. So let's discuss, some of the factors that need to be considered with this, with completing some fuel gas blending with hydrogen in our large bore legacy equipment. So number one, hydrogen has a low auto ignition temperature between that of ethane and methane. So there's considerations to be made in terms of the compression ratios. Most of our legacy large bore engines run around 8:1 on the compression ratio. Because of hydrogen's low auto ignition temperature, we need to be careful at those higher compression ratios. I think that theoretically, the effective compression ratio that we should be concerned around is around that 10:1 range. So fortunately, most of our legacy 2-cycle equipment is running around that 8:1 ratio. So we're looking pretty good there. We didn't have too many considerations, specifically with the units that we selected for both the in-house R&D testing as well as in the field. The second factor that is a major consideration is the fast flame speed of hydrogen, which is at about 10 times the speed of methane. So, of course, this is going to affect your ignition timing and the location of your peak pressures in the combustion chamber. For instance, at 100% natural gas, a 10-degree before top dead center ignition timing is going to result in somewhere around an 18-degree after top dead center peak pressure. So you've got about a 28-degree delay from ignition to the peak pressure that you see in the combustion chamber. At 100% hydrogen, your peak pressure is going to occur in about 2.8 degrees. So clearly we've got some work to do in understanding how we ramp up the retarding of the ignition timing to avoid knock in the combustion chamber and to avoid any kind of mechanical damage or safety concerns with personnel around the operating equipment. The third major factor under consideration is the fact that hydrogen, it takes about 3.5 cubic feet of hydrogen to displace 1 cubic foot of methane. So your fuel flow and your BTU-based air-fuel ratio programs are going to need to be updated and recalculated based on this increased fuel flow. Also, total equivalence ratio will require a new gas analysis to properly make adjustments if your programs are based on that. Here we've got an animation that was completed in-house. On the left-hand side, you can see 100% natural gas. On the right-hand side, you can see the combustion including a 20% hydrogen fuel gas blend. Now, what you can see on the right-hand side is a clear indication of the, how much faster that flame front propagation happens with that 20% hydrogen, particularly in that 5 to 11 degrees after top dead center. It's worth mentioning that this combustion modeling was based on our Ajax 2800 series unit that we have in our R&D test facility. This unit's been equipped with our new Clean Burn Plus technology, which is why you can see a center-mounted pre-combustion chamber at the top of the head and a side-mounted fuel injection system.
Hey, Jordan. Yep. One of the things that really stands out in the animation, if you look at the crown of the pistons that comes down the bore, you can see there's kind of a crevice volume, if you will. And you can see that the hydrogen really gets into that crevice volume. You see how it's all around the top of the piston. It achieves very uniform color very quickly compared to the one on the left.
Thanks for that, Hans. So we'll run through a description of the lab and field testing units that we utilized for the hydrogen fuel gas blending program. First off is at our test facility here in Houston, we utilize an Ajax 2802. This is a legacy large bore, slow speed unit, 15-inch bore, 16-inch stroke. This unit has been equipped and retrofitted with our latest Clean Burn Plus technology, which consists of a center-mounted pre-chamber in a reconfigured head. This is a multi-ported pre-combustion chamber which directs flame fronts throughout the combustion chamber to effectively reduce emissions levels. And this has also been, this new design also includes an electronically controlled fuel valve, which allows us to control the timing and the duration of the fuel injection in the main combustion chamber. This allows us to get away from some of the short circuiting that sometimes occurs between an overlapping of the exhaust valve still being, or exhaust ports still being open while the fuel valve opens and injects fuel into the system. Emissions levels for this particular engine with this retrofit are extremely low. This is a piston scavenged unit. This is a non-turbocharged unit, and we are able to achieve 0.5 gram NOx, 2 grams CO, and 0.7 VOC, as well as 800 ppm total hydrocarbons and less than 4 grams per brake horsepower hour methane. These are unheard of emissions levels for a piston scavenged unit without any work to with the air intake system to boost air and affect the air-fuel ratio. So we're really proud of this technology. So next I wanted to talk a little bit about our field testing partners. Our keynote speaker today, or this afternoon, is Jacob Seletsky. He's going to be with Williams, and he's going to be discussing some of the results that we saw on the 6V250 Cooper Bessemer unit out at their Kemmerer, Wyoming station. We saw some great results there. I don't want to steal any of his thunder for sure. Our second testing partner was Southern Star. We utilized a unit at their Hugoton, Kansas facility. Wanted to just take a second to send out a big thank you to our testing partners and those who collaborated with us on this effort, and the resources that they contributed, and the time and the flexibility with the running of their units. So thank you to both Williams and Southern Star for their collaboration on these efforts. The unit that we utilized at Southern Star was a Cooper Bessemer GM-VH12. This is, again, a legacy 2-cycle unit that's heavily utilized in the gas transmission field. 14-inch bore, 14-inch stroke. This is a factory turbocharged engine, so there are capabilities for adjusting its air-fuel ratio and mitigating some of the NOx trade-offs that we see that we did see when we injected hydrogen into the fuel blend. I want to point out that this unit is in an open chamber configuration, so that it does not have pre-combustion chambers. So this is a true example of a spark-ignited open chamber, legacy 2-cycle unit out in the field. The one modification that we did do with this unit was install our Cooper HyperBalance control system, which allowed us to do data acquisition and also set some alarms and shutdowns in case we got into abnormal combustion conditions that could potentially damage the equipment. and also potentially have safety concerns. So that was the only modification that we did to this unit. So I'll turn it over to Hans now to go through the results, and we'll take some questions later. So thank you.
Well, good morning, folks. We had a lot of fun testing with the hydrogen, and you're going to see here that we have kept the data presentation slides here to a minimum. Pretty short topic, and I'm not just trying to plug another conference, but there was a full suite of results presented at the Gas Machinery Conference in October of last year. If you're members, you can certainly see more of this stuff, okay? But that was 3 hours of data. So I didn't want to do that to you here today. So what I'm showing you here on the left is the Southern Star, or the GmbH emissions, and on the right is what we got out of our Ajax. And I combined all of this into a single slide because I don't really want you to look at any particular number. I want you to see that no matter whether it was a turbocharged engine or a piston scavenged engine, these trends all pretty much look the same, right? These are all basically the same shaped curves. And so what you see is that the response is predictable and it's repeatable. The next thing that I want to look at here, I need to look down here, not up there. Sorry about that, folks. It's a little confusing. The next thing that I want to look at here is how the unit performed with varying percentages of hydrogen. So in this graph, you see we did 5, 10, and 15% blends of hydrogen. And these are your combustion characteristics, okay? So peak firing pressure, PFP is peak firing pressure, and you can see that the peak firing pressure, as we added hydrogen, the peak firing pressure went up. I believe cut off of this graph, we went all the way to 30% on this unit. Down here on CV or COV, which is coefficient of variation, we're taking the standard deviation of combustion peak pressures and we're dividing them by the average peak pressure. So it's a relative measure of combustion stability. And so you can see that as we added hydrogen, combustion quality, if you will, the stability of the combustion improved with each incremental increase in hydrogen. So combustion quality improved, peak pressures got a little bit higher, and we can actually see that the heat rate or the fuel economy, it also improved, right? We used a little less fuel to do the same work as we added hydrogen. And this all goes to the fact that hydrogen burns very completely. It's a very, very tiny molecule. It gets into all those cracks that I was pointing out in the animation. It really helps to completely consume all the fuel in the cylinder. So that's one of the things we see. Now, in the testing, we did a lot of other testing. This is without any mitigating strategies for NOx. We didn't hold ignition timing or hold the location of peak pressure constant. We weren't retarding timing. We're just adding more and more hydrogen and seeing what happened in this testing, and that's what you see here. The next slide, and this one gets really busy, but these are all the emissions numbers that we care about. So on the bottom left, you see methane, and so you can see that adding hydrogen, a little bit of hydrogen goes a long way. And here you can see all the way out to 30%, and the colors are decoded for you now. But when you keep in mind that when I add, hydrogen, I have to add 3.5 cubic feet of hydrogen to displace 1 cubic foot of methane, right? So you got to kind of keep that ratio in mind. So when I'm talking about, let me go back here. When I'm talking about 30% hydrogen by volume, I'm really only talking about 8% displacement of my methane, right? 7 to 8% displacement of my methane. And yet I got a 30% reduction in my methane emissions in what's coming out the stack of the engine. That's a pretty big change. When you look over here at CO2, you can see that we got about a 12% reduction in CO2
for roughly an 8% displacement of my methane fuel gas. So there's a lever. So you can see that a little bit of hydrogen is creating a bigger impact than just 1-to-1. Total hydrocarbons, of course, total hydrocarbons, methane, they're going to look pretty much the same. The CO numbers, they also went down because hydrogen really helps complete that combustion, right? The CO, these are lean burn engines. They have an abundance of oxygen in the exhaust. 12, 13, 14% is the exhaust oxygen content of these engines. And at that level, it's not like there's not enough O2 to get all the fuel consumed. But some of the fuel is up against the cold cylinder walls. Some of the fuel is down in that crevice volume around that piston, and so the flame quenches as it hits those cold surfaces and doesn't complete combustion, and that's where your CO comes from. It's basically where all of these carbon-based emissions come from. You can see that the NOx definitely did trend up, and this is because as we added the hydrogen, the flame front advanced, right? So it pulled the location of peak pressure in. They're closer to top dead center. You pull that location of peak pressure, the higher it gets. And we know that NOx is created exponentially with temperature. Pressure is temperature, it's a closed volume, right? So if the pressure goes up, the temperature goes up. And that's where this comes from. There are mitigating strategies, and there were mitigating tests done. We just don't have time to present all that data here today. But if you retard the timing a little bit, add a little more boost to the engine, it's completely possible to hold the NOx constant while you do this. And then finally, the CO2 numbers, we hit that. And VOCs are volatile organic compounds, which is going to look just like all your other fuel gas-based pollutants. I'm going to stop here for just a second and ask if you have any questions. I know it's a busy graph. Yes, sir.
You showed heat rate improvement, but the horsepower output
Was constant for all of this within our ability, right? The pipeline conditions are changing, so there's a pocket opening or a pocket closing, so within about 2%. On the dyno at our shop down at Port Northwest, on the Ajax, so the right graphs, let me look down here. This one is heat rate here. On the dyno, we can absolutely dial in horsepower and hold it, but in the real world, we're at the mercy of the pipeline. Anything else?
If anyone has questions, I have a mic here, so.
Oh, and that question for y'all that didn't hear it was about heat rate. How are we able to do the heat rate and the load, manage the load? All right, if nothing else, we'll go on. What we can say is that the testing to date with hydrogen has been very successful. And in fact, we've done nothing special to these engines. The only special work that was done was to get a hydrogen blending skid installed, right? And getting hydrogen in quantity, in usable quantities to a plant is not an easy task. At Port Northwest, we ran into some issues with fire code and such that stopped us from bringing in the big trailer that we originally intended, right? So we had to fall back and punt. But the testing has been very successful. The units are completely unmodified. We see that a little bit of hydrogen goes a long way. We see a 2-to-1 lever on CO reduction, right? You displace 1% of your methane fuel and you can take out 2% of your CO. We saw about a 1.5-to-1 lever on the methane reduction. And even on the CO2e, when you're looking at methane, you have to remember that it's counting 25 times in the exhaust. And so if you just have most units, stock units, okay, most of the stock units out there, about 3% of the measured fuel gas ends up out in the exhaust, right? It's unburnt methane or direct slip through the fuel injection process. We have technologies today to mitigate a lot of that. We can't eliminate it yet, but we can mitigate some of that today. And when you start looking at 3% and 25 times, it becomes a significant number. Your CO2e from slipped methane can be almost equal to the actual direct CO2 production in engines. And so with modern technologies, you can take about the first third of that out, and then with blending in hydrogen, you can go get about another third of that, and that's awfully impressive when you combine technologies. You did see an improved heat rate, combustion quality. The negative side was NOx is increasing. It's going to require some mitigating strategies, which is going to be around managing location of peak pressure and keeping the engine a little bit leaner than maybe you currently would do it. But I'm going to jump to the next rule, the one that came out and kind of has pushed CO2 and CO2E off the front page right now, and that's the good neighbor rule. We're all about to do a lot of NOx work anyway. So if we're going to be working to reduce NOx, we'll be installing the kind of technologies that are required to mitigate the NOx anyway. So we got that handled. With that, any more questions? I think we're almost on time for break. I think, yes, ma'am.
can you wait a moment for the microphone?
He's coming with the mic for you. All the way up front.
I was just curious if you have any data yet on whether mitigating NOx will counteract methane reduction?
No, it does not.
Okay.
We do have that data. And like I said, the complete data set got published at the GMC, and that would be the place to look for that.
Thank you.
We can work with you, Jack, and see, well, I think we have to reach out to GMC to make sure we can share it through your website, but I don't have a problem with that.
Any other questions? Are you looking at doing any testing above 30% at this point?
At this point, not, but there is a project going on at Colorado State University where they're looking to push that further. I've heard rumors of some of that result, and I've heard that they may have found kind of where the engine didn't like it anymore. So, but it was way up there past the 90% range. Hydrogen is interesting. I mean, as a fuel, it changes combustion in a way that benefits the engine. And so that's pretty cool. I have lots of questions around where that hydrogen is going to come from and the quantities we need. You know, you heard today, most of it's black or gray. You take methane, and it's funny, so many years from chemistry, it took me a while to remember it, but a mole is a mole. So if you take a mole of methane, or standard cubic foot of methane, however you want to say it, you take 1 part methane, you can crack that and make 2 parts hydrogen, H2 hydrogen, by the way, right? So for 1 cubic foot of methane, I can get 2 cubic feet of hydrogen. Well, I need 3 cubic feet of hydrogen, 3.5 actually, to displace my 1 methane. But you know, you begin to get a handle on where some of this can come from, right? And I think there's a lot of promise in CO2 capture technologies to move that gray hydrogen further along to the blue spectrum, maybe. I also can see, you know, every engineer loves efficiency and waste heat recovery. You could use waste heat recovery to power electrolysis machines. You can take the excess heat and exhaust coming off the engines, turn about 10% of your rated power into electricity to do electrolysis. You get about 80% of that back, but hey man, if you can get 8% of your fuel gas coming in as hydrogen, you're talking about 8% as total energy. You're talking about 25% of the fuel gas for the cost of equipment, and God knows what the maintenance is, but for the cost of equipment and maintenance, there are some possibilities there.
Any last questions? We have time for one more. All right.
All right.
Thank you, Hans.
Thank you.